Bonton, Dallas is doing numbers fast. And to Erica, the Dallas Negro Housing Crisis, I appreciate y'all. The reason why we here.
By the dawn of the 20th century, Dallas was booming. Settled along the banks of the flood-prone Trinity River, the city had grown into a thriving trade center following the arrival of the railroads. As the wealth of the city grew, Jewish merchants made South Dallas their home. As their mansions on South Boulevard and Park Row needed to be maintained, black workers were brought in to serve as cooks, maids, and yardmen, meaning that the limited pockets of land allocated to colored people were the least desirable in the city by virtue of their location along rail lines or in the Trinity River's floodplain. As the growth of South Dallas continued and new housing for blacks was needed, a large area near Metzger's Dairy on the confluence of the Trinity River and White Rock Creek was set aside. Then a hog and calf farm belonging to Mr. O.E. Taylor. These developments would become what we know today as Bonton. Explicitly for blacks, several housing developments were built on the Taylors' land, the largest of which was named Lincoln Manor. Smaller developments began to fill up the land, including 1924. By the 1930s, the developments stretched south into the Trinity River's floodplain to include the Lincoln Manor No. 3 and Bonton developments. Allocated to colored people were the least desirable in the city by virtue of their location along rail lines or in the Trinity River's floodplain. As the growth of South Dallas continued and new housing for blacks was needed, a large area near Metzger's Dairy on the confluence of the Trinity River and White Rock Creek was set aside. Then a hog and calf farm belonging to Mr. O.E. Taylor. These developments would become what we know today as Bonton. Explicitly for blacks, several housing developments were built on the Taylors' land, the largest of which was named Lincoln Manor. Smaller developments began to fill up the land, including 1924's large Ideal addition to the east. By the 1930s, developments stretched south into the Trinity River's floodplain to include the Lincoln Manor No. 3 and Bonton developments. The impacts of segregation had only just begun shaping the development of the neighborhood.
People wanted to own their own home.
My family settled down there at the end of Gent Street. At that time, they didn't have running water. They didn't have electricity.
We had just an old frame house, and what they call.
And what made me, even though everybody know I'm from the Grove, what made me do this is I had family in Bonton too, so we used to go to Bonton all the time. They drop us off in the front, and you go over whichever family member house you want to.
Picket fence now, it was a fence that they put up, so it wasn't very well picketed, you know. And we had an outdoor toilet in the back, so we always had to go outside to use the restroom.
And we had a wood stove too. And you talking about like the put wood in there, and I mean it would blast.
We used to have a thing, we call it the high end and the low end.
Low end.
That was the high end
Down
of one
low.
time, what we called. The
mean,
high end, which when it get up that way, we said, oh man, that's the high end.
They call them the Bonton Raiders down there. The kids, they called us the Lincoln Manor Raiders. If you went down there, boy, you get rocked like you was a dog. At that time, the police that patrol up here, they didn't go down there. You had to get a different group of police, the county police that went down there.
And so Bonton was kind of the back part of South Dallas. And then it was also developed in the floodplain.
And you know, South Dallas was saying, when the wind blow, would leave a hole in the road When it rained, that hole would fill up with water. Coming down Bear Street, when it rained hard, Bear Street looked like a river.
Whenever it rained, the water would always come up, and we try to play in the water, which the other kids could. We had to slip and do it.
We didn't have a playground. We made our playground. It was in the street in the yard.
That's called giving people
When my parents
undersized
went to
land,
work, you stay. You just have to stay in the yard.
But we would sleep out the yard every once in a while, go in the streets next door. And on Gin Street, we could see down to Bear Street. And if we outside playing and Mama in the house and Daddy's coming from work, we could always look down the end of the street, and if we see him, we back in that yard.
Lord, that's too funny, man. That's some old school, I'm gonna say country stuff, man. For real, that's too funny, man.
So we don't want to get a whooping. Because if we be out the yard, we getting a whooping. Other than going to school or going to church, that was it for us.
On Sunday mornings, Sundays period, that you was in church all day.
My grandmother sang in the choir, and when my grandmother went to church, we went to church. We went to Sunday school. We went to 11 o'clock service. If there was evening service.
That's what I was saying, though. You can't act like Christianity and church didn't play a major role in the black community. It used to. I don't know where it got lost like it did, but that used to be the backbone.
3 o'clock service, we went to that.
My grandmother, she would pack a lunch. We would eat at the church. Everybody would bring something. And that's what the church was kind of like. Family structure.
Mm-hmm. Really does not employ union Negroes, moving picture machine operators. That helps. Absolutely.
Nickel Theater was a movie house that
I ain't gonna lie, man. I had uncles and stuff that ran all up and down Burr Street. That's why this is so interesting to me. Old players, man. Old school players, man.
everybody went to on Fridays and Saturdays.
Back then, we didn't have TV. You had to go to the show to see the newsreel.
And we would mostly go on Saturdays.
I didn't know that. You had to go to the show to see the news read. That's crazy.
And it was like, they had those chapter pictures, what you call them, like Red Rider. And, you have to come back the next Saturday to catch up on his, like, chapter 1.
Because it was nothing that we could do downtown other than, go to the Majestic, where we could set up in what we used to call the crow's nest. And all of the crows would set up at the top. And, some people, they called it the buzzard's roost. It had various names.
Back in the day, that was the old-timey streetcar. You had to buy a little clip about big as your thumb. That was some stores up on the railroad car line. Called 5 and 10 cent store. And a grocery store. Then at the end of the railroad car line, that was some colored people that had a little restaurant there.
But there was a lot of black owners, that had business in that area.
Yeah, all them stores on Barrel.
Yeah.
Do you remember Jack when Mr. Paulson was down there? And Mr. Bowman, that was a black grocery.
Lois Thomas had a grocery store there right across the street from the school.
That was Miss Black. She had it was a cafe.
Time a streetcar. You had to buy a little clip about big as your thumb. That was some stores up on the railroad car line. Called 5 and 10 cent store. And a grocery store. Then at the end of the railroad car line, that was some colored people that had a little restaurant there.
But there was a lot of black owners, that had business in that area.
Yeah, all them stores on Barrel. Yeah. Do you remember Jack when Mr. Paulson was down there? And Mr. Bowman, that was a black grocery.
Lois Thomas them had a
like
grocery store there right across the street from the school.
That was Miss Black. She had it was a cafe.
Okay. And Miss Ponce and them had their grocery store.
Beverly Smith's grandmother sold sandwiches, that meatball and a sauce over the meat. Nicholas sandwich.
Nicholas sandwich.
There was a limited opportunity for you to patronize white-owned businesses.
What's the Nicholas
and
sandwich?
so these businesses represented a type of economic protest that even though I can't shop at Dillard's or Macy's or whatnot, I can go to my own stores in my own community. Now, what would happen there is that economically it provided vitality because all that money was circulating in that community. So that provided economic vitality.
Man, did you hear that? Did y'all hear what he just said, man? He kept that money circulating in that neighborhood, and that made economic vitality. Beautiful. Where did we go wrong?
That you don't see today.
Yeah. I say no better than to buy that in the first place. I blame the real estate man for selling a Negro man a house. He ought to have to live next door to a nigga mad. There's some Bible scripture.
The Bonton area is an area where blacks who lived on
crazy. Y'all hated people that much. Y'all use Bible verses to justify. Man, that's crazy, man.
And Pine Street and other areas to communities north of Hatcher fled when whites started bombing their homes on those streets.
Wow.
Now, it had been rumored that it was originally called Bum Town. As blacks started to come home from the war,
I thought Bonton
they
was
didn't want
French.
to live in the ghetto anymore. So as they moved out, you start having bombings over in South Dallas. People would buy houses, and the next night, somebody would throw dynamite into their house and blow up the house. And
man, that's wild, man. Like that's some of the history they never taught me in school. Nobody never told me about none of this shit. But I do remember growing up, I used to wonder, why did some of the older people seem like they were just so afraid of something, like they knew some shit that we didn't know. Like they was always waiting for something to happen. Like, man, I can't explain it, but man, I know somebody know what I'm talking about. It seemed like they made sure they stayed extra safe from something, like they was expecting something, like they knew about the shit. And I guess it was like, man, don't tell the kids about that, because if we grew up knowing that, man, we probably would have been terrified. That's crazy, man.
Walker family moved to a home at 16th Street. Van pulled into the driveway. A crowd of white neighbors, led by a tribe of housewives, stood in the street throwing rocks at the family, shattering their windows and shouting threats. The police had to intervene with the angry women who had no remorse for their actions.
I remember, I forgot the name of that movie, but I guess that movie was about this incident. They just hadn't, well, I ain't gonna say it was that incident, about a similar incident.
First incident of white flight in Dallas. This on their hands. The black population was increasing rapidly, yet black people weren't welcome to live in most neighborhoods. Dallas officials created a plan to provide segregated housing for Black families without upsetting their white neighbors. The first public housing for Black residents was called the Roseland Homes. It opened in North Dallas in 1942 with 650 units. Over the next decade, more Black housing projects followed. In West Dallas, Edgar Ward Palace, Turner Courts, and Rose Terrace. Hundreds of Black families moved into these housing projects, and for a while, the city was pacified. There was still a matter of what to do with more affluent Black families.
And eventually, it stopped. But the rocking of the kids going to Lincoln High School, the bus got rocked and people threw bottles. Kids had to lay down in the bus. You know, it wasn't explosive bombs, but it was the same symbolism.
Lincoln.
You know, Lincoln being one of two and probably for a while 3 Black high schools that Blacks would attend, has a pretty storied place in South Dallas.
Oh, it was great. Oh, it was a great time at Lincoln. I enjoyed going to the school. All the friends that I grew up with from H.S. Thompson from the first grade all the way up, we all, you know, went to Lincoln. Lincoln was a great school. There was teachers that was concerned with students, you know, that they get an education. So you had teachers that was stood by kids.
And to be honest, man, to this day, Lincoln still got a good reputation.
To make sure that things was done the right way for them to exceed in life.
Miss Thelma Page, Page versus Dallas Independent School District, which was the lawsuit to get equal pay for teachers, came out of the teachers at Lincoln High School.
The man that taught Latin over there then, his name was Pruitt.
When I took shop, you know, and I think my girlfriend, my next door neighbor, we was only 2 females in the shop. It's all guys. So we had all the attention.
I love school. That was one of the greatest things in my life was going to school up there.
Glad to go.
And didn't miss no day going to school.
No day. That's
like
these
kids do now, be trying to make an excuse. I'm sick, I'm all this. The only time I was out of school, I was really, really sick. I didn't like to miss no day out of school. I like to go to school every day because I like to know what's going on.
How things change. Now they be ready to miss it for anything.
And then I was in the choir also. Miss Bailey was the choir teacher during that time.
You know, Marina Bailey Choir, which at one time was one of the best choirs in Dallas and that actually literally performed over a good part of the world.
And we had Professor Miller, band director. He turned out some musical geniuses. One of his prize students was a guy who ended up playing in the Ray Charles band. He was from down in Bonton. His name was David Fathead Newman. Ray Charles used to have a saying, said if you needed musicians for a good band, you had to come to Dallas. So South Dallas was producing people like the Pair Extraordinaire.
Bobby Humphrey, she's a jazz flutist. She lived in the projects.
She went to Lincoln High School. She was my next door neighbor. And she began touring with Dizzy Gillespie.
Even the men, the core of the Ray Charles band came from South Dallas.
But you have some people that was in that community that's awesome. They did some things, man. They go unrecognized, but they did some nice things for Dallas.
Yes, sir. Man, no longer now 2 manners.
My father was carpenter helper, that's what they call it. He helped build Turner Courts, you know, those apartments down there, we would call it down in Bonton.
But see, you couldn't put projects where ISA homes were. Because people said, oh, no, not in my backyard. And so
they didn't want some projects nowhere near them.
You know, where do you put them? You put them in floodplain, and you put them in the least desirable parts of town.
Turner Courts was more laid back a little bit. Rose Terrace was a little bit more outgoing. And then you had the people that never lived in the projects. It's in between. So in that circle, in that small community, you had three communities in that small community. We used to have to improvise when it came to games and stuff because we didn't have a lot of the games that y'all have today or that we have today. And we kind of had a rivalry. Rose Terrace, we would compete in sports, you know, we'd meet up, we had
That's how it was back then. It wasn't about that, but they had fun, man. You didn't have to kill nobody. Just kick it. Have fun. Now you need a Draco and a Switch to go have fun. That's, I don't know what happened, man. How did it go through? The worst like this, man. Oh shit, my bad, y'all. Fine, man.
Gamma. Then he would win my lunch money, and then he'd give me a bowl of chili and send me to school at 12. But I was kind of, you know, that's the way Barrel Street was. You know, that's the way Barrel Street was. And I got a lot of whoopings for being on Barrel Street. You know, but during that period of time, it was like, I can't make no money at home. I can make money on Barrel.
Everybody trying to make them a little hustle, man. That's crazy.
They used to do it with railroads. The railroad was used to cut off the black neighborhood and the white neighborhood. Now they designed the freeway system to cut off.
So now they do it with the freeway. There's so many examples there, from Dallas to Miami to Houston to wherever you go, man. There's so many examples of that shit, man. How they use the freeway to cut it off like they used to use the railroad.
Ain't nothing black changed. Neighborhoods and the white neighborhoods.
It was houses along. I'll back off and on that freeway. What the freeway is, it was nothing but houses. Right next to that freeway was a big, nice church, which is now Mount Horan. They had to move their church. It's up on Carpenter now.
There was a cohesiveness to the neighborhood, I think, that existed up until the time of the building of C.F. Hahn Freeway. And that's really what kind of cut that neighborhood in two.
If you study American history, you study how they set up fences and gates and how they designed the freeways with no exits and entrances on them.
Man, you know, I grew up young, looking at them little floodgates, whatever you want to call it. That shit always caught my attention when you going to Bonton. Learn that shit. It always caught my attention, man. I don't know. It was just weird to me. I was like, damn, I ain't never seen nothing like this in a white neighborhood. It's always in a black neighborhood.
You know, those things don't happen accidentally.
Let me run that back what OG said right quick. What you were saying, OG? Push play, didn't it?
The time, it was like...
Oh, you said things don't happen.
Time the building of C.
Now my room has got two windows.
Freeways with no exits and
Stranger Harris.
You know, those things don't happen
Freeways
accidentally.
with no exits don't happen accidentally.
The impacts of the C.F. Hahn Freeway were severe and resulted in an identity shift for residents. With the neighborhood split in two, the Lincoln Manor name faded from local vocabulary. South of C.F. Hahn, Bonton became so isolated that Bear Street was the only access in or out of the neighborhood. This extreme isolation correlated with an increase in criminal activity, and eventually neighbors began to abandon.
It's funny because now they rechanged, they done redid all of that little section right there. They finally added a few more exits, but it's amazing how at the time I didn't realize this, but man, I could believe this 100%.
The Bonton name, dubbing the area as the Rochester Park neighborhood, after the large park and housing development built in 1953. The biggest changes were still on the horizon as the national civil rights movement brought integration to Dallas.
Go downtown, and the money that could have been used to improve the neighborhoods, that money was now spent downtown. And it went to the merchants who took it north. So North Dallas improved.
So, well, a lot of people think they call it integration. It's so good. Like OG just said, shit, that took the dollar out of the neighborhood, man. Now all of a sudden everybody happy because they can go to Neiman Marcus. Yeah, if you're from Dallas, you remember when everybody was walking around with them Neiman Marcus hats on. You know what I'm talking about. I mean, happy they can go to Neiman's.
And South Dallas went down because it had no viable economic base.
That's where the decline starts. If I'm going to Minyards, I don't have the same amount of money to go to spend at Bob's down the street. And menu selection is a lot more expansive than Bob's. So I'm going to get all my groceries at Minyards. I may now go up to Bob's if I need a carton of milk or a can of peas or whatnot. And then, Bob's closes and somebody else opens up, and they're going to try to recoup all their money on a can of peas in one sale. And so it gets to be a cycle that perpetuates itself.
People have, their homestead here. Okay, now them just lost their homes, I mean, they didn't lose them, they just left. There's the house, and then the city takes over the house, and the houses go down. They just standing there, boarded up, whatever,
Somebody breaks a window out in one house, and the next kid comes through and he knocks out 2 windows. Nobody replaces the windows. Then the people next door, they say, well, we don't want to live next door to an abandoned house. So they move out, and somebody knocks the windows out in that house. And
just that simple,
somebody says, well, I don't want to live next door to 2 abandoned houses. So they move out, and now you got 3 empty houses.
Man,
You
just
get all
that
of the negative influences. You get the beer stores, the liquor stores. They come in. You get drunk, you get high. That's kind of what life is about.
Some guys that's from the community, some homeboys that was from the community that come back from the military. And when they came back with drug problems. So as they came back in.
Did you hear that, man? So, if you're paying attention like I'm paying attention, you just heard that the drug problems wasn't around like that till the guys came back from the military. That's when a lot of the drug problems started happening. Man, let me tap into that right quick. Hold on. The mind of this little video that I seen.
States ain't doing for us, man. We busted our ass. We went over there to us. We're a Vietnam veteran, and we can get disability, and we can get this, and we can get a job, and we ain't got. We don't get a to get our welfare. You understand?
The war in Vietnam is over, and the junkies are coming home, angry and scared and strung out. In New York City, there are 300,000 Vietnam-era veterans, and 40,000 of them are addicts, and in fact, less than honorable, ineligible for.
And we can get disability, and we can get this, and we can get a job, and we ain't got. We don't get a to get our welfare. You understand?
The war in Vietnam is over, and the junkies are coming home, angry and scared and strung out. In New York City, there are 300,000 Vietnam-era veterans, and 40,000 of them are addicts. Most of them began using heroin, barbiturates, and amphetamines in Vietnam, and most of them came home with less than honorable drug-related discharges. These GIs are ineligible for veterans' educational, home loan, and employment benefits. They get no long-term VA medical or psychological treatment for their addiction. They're offered only methadone, a numbing drug with which some men can function and others can't.
It's crazy, man. How they say it's amazing, man. I can't even lie. It's amazing. Whew.
The drugs came into the community. It was a lot of discretion used about it. I think that became different the latter part of the 80s. People just stopped caring whoever they could misuse for their own selfish gain. That's when things started taking a turn for the worse.
It just started coming in overnight. Seemed like overnight. We was overwhelmed with drugs. Seemed like it just happened overnight. And they was coming all around. And some of them did not live into our community at all. But they knew where to come and to drop it off. And it was our community. And I think because we let it happen, I was afraid to say something.
People were scared to come over here. They were.
Man, this is deep, man. Really, this is really deep, man. And you go look back and think about how your neighborhood was back then, and like, dang. But when you're young, you don't realize that what you're doing, man.
Scared to go to West Dallas. People were scared to come down to Bonton because of what they had heard.
Yeah.
You know, because Bonton had a reputation at the time. It was bad folks down there, and people didn't want to go down there and get beat down.
I grew up in a very rough time. My family was poor. We grew up on welfare. We grew up, with government assistance, government housing and everything. So it was a real issue, and a lot of people in the community grew up the same way. We had no dad around because, in the environment we lived in, dads were either locked up or not in the picture. So, my dad was a heroin addict. He did heroin a lot, so my mom didn't deal with him. It was real rough, but you considered it a norm because, growing up down here, you didn't see what was on the other side of downtown. This is what was normal to you.
And then we also started getting brothels, motels and stuff built into the community. And so when you got that, you started getting a lot of the wrong elements, the wrong people, the wrong environment. You had drugs, prostitution, gambling. That came into the community when you started getting those type of establishments built in there.
There was a lady at the corner of our street named Miss McDonald who was wrapped, tied, and bound by drug dealers. They wanted to use
I had to stop right there. When I heard this, and I was like, damn, this the type of drug dealers used to be around. Gonna tie an old lady up. These niggas was fucked up, fresh out of slavery. Y'all see the type of shit that go on and we wonder why people look at us in such bad ways. Man, y'all gave the people fuel to do us like they doing us, man. This is fucking insane, man. Oh, my mama, this crazy.
her house because it was in an alley. At the time, Bear Street was pretty much a vacant, abandoned street.
Damn.
And there was...
You considered it a norm because, growing up down here, you didn't see what was on the other side of downtown. This is what was normal to you.
And then we also started getting brothels, motels and stuff built into the community. And so
at the time, Bear Street was pretty much...
gambling, that came into the community when you started getting those type of establishments built in there.
There was a lady at the corner of our street named Miss McDonald who was wrapped, tied, and bound by drug dealers. They wanted to use her house because it was in an alley. At the time, Bear Street was pretty much a vacant, abandoned street. And there was a lot of crime that was developing in the area.
I mean, somebody got to stand. I formed a crime watch group. We had about 50-some people had came to my house, and the policemen came, and other things started coming. Not just crime.
That was her name.
It was code, sanitation. All of those things was working together because the highways, I'm 5'8", and the highways was tall as me on these vacant lots. And that's where the children were in those vacant lots shooting hooky. On Barrett Street, they were selling drugs, and some guys came. And they told us that they was going to shoot us if we didn't stop doing what we was doing into the community. So at that time, the Panthers, the Black Panthers, Amen, it was another group called Amen. All of us got together there on Barrett Street, and we blocked the streets.
It disturbed a lot of the drug dealers in the community, and things just went wild. A lot of fighting words was being talked and stuff like that.
Good Dallas history, man.
To the Black Panthers and to the Crime Watch.
We wanted to let the whole community know that we wasn't going to tolerate drugs in our community.
And if I may say, it was the first time that you actually got the news cameras to come out to our community. And that was the first time I think Bear Street really got some public time, that people could see.
That's what's up.